region is on a knife edge. In recent days, Tehran has reportedly offered a proposal that would, at least on paper, reopen the Strait of Hormuz and carve out a path toward a halt in active hostilities while deferring the thorniest nuclear questions to a later stage. The offer, according to officials briefed on the exchanges, is meant to relieve pressure on global shipping and ease an economic squeeze that has tightened inside Iran. But American leaders, intelligence officials, and analysts warn this could be a maneuver designed to blunt U.S. leverage without delivering the kind of or the timing of concessions Washington says it needs. Across the Capitol, the White House has left no doubt about its red lines. In a blunt public formulation, the president framed the stakes in stark terms to an interviewer, President Trump. Israel would get blown up within minutes, so we can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon. This should have been done by previous presidents. 47 years it has been going on. A&D, nobody did anything about it. We've done a great job. A&D will end very soon. A&D will be victorious, but they cannot have a nuclear weapon. That is the administration's declared optics and policy posture, absolute, non-negotiable, and driven by the imperative of preventing an Iranian nuclear breakout. Inside the corridors of national security, that posture is being translated into action. The United States has maintained maritime interdictions, economic measures, and a posture of military readiness in the region. Officials argue those measures are intended to maintain leverage, frozen Iranian assets, sanctions pressure, and the credible threat of renewed kinetic operations remain the principal levers Washington believes can compel Tehran to accept limits that would block a weapons program. Yet the calculus on the ground has become more complicated, and not only because of diplomatic signals from Tehran. Iran's foreign minister has been traveling and consulting with key partners. This week, Tehran's top diplomat traveled to Moscow for discussions with senior Russian officials, part of a shuttle diplomacy effort meant to shape mediation and ceasefire possibilities. Those meetings are being watched closely in capitals from Washington to Riyadh. Russia remains one of Tehran's most consequential partners and a likely channel for negotiating the terms, sequencing, and enforcement of any pause in hostilities. From Tehran's perspective, reopening the Strait of Hormuz is a high-value bargaining chip. The strait is not only strategically symbolic, it is one of the world's busiest oil transit choke points. International shipping and global energy markets would instantly benefit from a stable and clearly secured lane. For Iran, offering access could be framed domestically as a diplomatic opening that preserves sovereignty while extracting concessions in other arenas. For Washington and its regional allies, the immediate question is whether such an offer would be accompanied by verifiable commitments on nuclear controls and a demonstrable rollback of Iran's ability to weaponize its nuclear program. That is where the distrust runs deep. U.S. analysts who monitor Iranian strategy think the same moves Iran has used for decades, carefully calibrated advances punctuated by tactical retreats, could be at play. One senior analyst on a recent broadcast argued that Tehran's aim is to eliminate our leverage by removing the most visible and immediate U.S. pressure point at sea. That analyst suggested Iran wants to force the dispute onto different terrain, a protracted bargaining process over frozen assets, and diplomatic recognition that could make Western demands harder to impose. He warned against trading immediate maritime stability for the long-term erosion of pressure that prevents nuclear progress. There is another practical problem. Even if the strait were reopened as part of a deal, the deeper test would be verification and enforcement. A temporary cessation of hostilities without transparent inspections, intrusive monitoring, and clear penalties for violations could simply buy Tehran time to continue activities that the United States and its partners judge unacceptable. That is the dilemma for negotiators, how to translate a tactical concession into structural assurance. U.S. strategy, according to senior officials, is driven by a layered approach. On the economic front, the administration points to tens of billions in frozen Iranian assets and sanctions machinery as tools to incentivize compliance. On the military front, the posture is meant to be deterrent, maintaining the option to resume kinetic operations if diplomacy stalls or if Iran crosses an agreed threshold. On the intelligence front, the president is being briefed daily, and the White House is relying on its principal intelligence and national security officials for assessment and options. In Washington's current national security team, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency is a senior voice in those conversations, and the president routinely consults the CIA director for the latest intelligence and operational appraisals. Not all inside Iran speak with one voice. American officials and regional analysts alike report fractures inside Tehran's leadership over how much to concede in any nuclear bargain. Hardliners who are skeptical of Western intentions remain influential, and the Revolutionary Guards retain significant sway over both security and foreign policy levers. Those divisions complicate any expectation that a single bargaining position in Moscow, Tehran, or elsewhere will translate into quick implementation. On the television airwaves and in public briefings, the arguments often lapse into moral and strategic absolutism. One prominent analyst on a broadcast said plainly that there is no evidence that any sort of economic pressure right now is going to induce Iran to negotiate in good faith. That statement captures a widely shared frustration. Economic pain by itself has not produced the political opening inside Iran many in Washington hope to see. Protest movements have so far not translated into a change in regime behavior, and the security apparatus remains heavily armed and organized. Behind the scenes, diplomats and back channels are trying to thread an almost impossible needle, stop the fighting, prevent a nuclear breakout, and avoid a wider regional conflagration. Foreign capitals, including Moscow, are now playing a more visible role. Tehran's outreach to Russia underscores a strategic alignment of interests on some issues, even while their agendas diverge elsewhere. The exact content of those Moscow meetings is not public, but officials say they center on de-escalation terms and mechanisms for moving from active conflict to a diplomatic process. The domestic political calculus in Washington matters too. The president's public pronouncements and the administration's insistence that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon reflect both strategic judgment and a political posture crafted for American audiences. There are hard limits, the White House insists, and those limits shape any offer the United States would accept. Officials privately caution against interpreting offers from Tehran as definitive. They are often revisionist, contingent, and meant to probe U.S. resolve. Regional partners are watching intently. Israel understandably sits at the center of the strategic equation. Jerusalem has consistently taken the position that a nuclear-capable Iran is an existential threat, and that view informs the posture of several U.S. allies across the region. Gulf states who have their own security anxieties want reassurance that any pause is durable and that their defenses will be strengthened if Tehran remains aggressive. The humanitarian toll of the conflict is another aspect that colors international responses. Economic sanctions, blockades, and disruptions to commerce have consequences for ordinary Iranians. Some commentators argue that the pressure could lead to popular upheaval, altering the political balance inside Tehran. Others point out that the regime has proven resilient in the face of sustained economic pain and that societal fractures have not yet translated into a successful challenge to the ruling establishment. That is why many policymakers emphasize the need for a strategy that combines pressure with credible political pathways, not pressure for its own sake. For Washington, there is also the pragmatic question of sequencing. If Iran wants a Strait open, what does that buy the United States? Does it come with immediate, verifiable steps on nuclear enrichment limits, short timelines for dismantling key capabilities, inspections, and penalties for violations? Or does it merely delay the day of reckoning while Tehran continues to build capabilities in the margins? The administration's answer has leaned toward skepticism. Partial confidence building measures must be nested within a durable framework that ensures transparency and reversibility, not a temporary lull. The global markets, insurers, and maritime companies are racing to price the risk. Any credible diplomatic path that preserves commercial flow through the Strait of Hormuz is a public good, yet the risk of cynicism and backsliding is real. A deal that is weak on verification would be worse than no deal at all, because it might lull markets and policymakers into complacency while the underlying dangers persist. On Capitol Hill and in policy shops, voices that favor maintaining a hard line point to the need to preserve leverage. They argue that giving away the immediate tactical victory of a reopened strait without securing incontrovertible nuclear guarantees will be a strategic mistake. Others counter that any path that reduces the chance of a wider war and preserves civilian shipping is worth exploring, provided it does not undercut long-term non-proliferation goals. Those debates now shape the contours of what Washington will accept as an outcome. The intelligence community's role in this moment is crucial. Accurate current assessments of Iran's nuclear timeline, its command and control structures, and the sincerity of any diplomatic offer will determine whether the administration loosens or tightens pressure. Those assessments, the president is told, will be provided not only by the CIA, but also by the broader intelligence apparatus that watches facilities, procurement networks, and covert activity. Diplomats caution against over-reliance on rhetoric. Big public pronouncements can box leaders into positions that make compromise politically costly, but they also underline the political reality. Any U.S. leader must answer hard questions at home about how to prevent a nuclear-armed adversary that openly threatens allies. The administration's public line is designed to reassure those constituencies that Washington will not accept a fait accompli. If diplomacy can be salvaged, it will likely require several hard things done at once: reliable multilateral verification arrangements, a timetable that limits sensitive activities, and a mechanism to ensure that if Iran cheats, meaningful and rapid penalties follow. It will require patient, sometimes secret negotiations to bridge the gap between Tehran's desire for relief and Washington's insistence on durable controls. It will also require international partners to stand together, even as national interests diverge. For now, the situation remains fluid. Tehran's outreach to Moscow and other capitals is a sign that it is at least probing potential routes to relief. Washington's public posture is clear. Nuclear weapons remain an absolute red line. The path between those two positions is narrow, rocky, and uncertain. What happens next will depend on the interplay of diplomacy, intelligence, pressure, and the internal dynamics of Iran's leadership. The world will watch whether offers to reopen a vital waterway translate into meaningful reductions in the risk of a nuclear-armed Iran, or whether they become another chapter in a long history of tactical maneuvers that leave the underlying threat intact. As this story unfolds, policymakers will keep doing what they always do in moments like this: calibrate leverage, test offers, and measure intentions against verifiable actions. For citizens and markets, the hope is simple and urgent: that the ships will sail safely, that escalation will be averted, and that hard bargains will produce secure, enforceable outcomes rather than short-term pauses that postpone a far more dangerous reckoning.